Liz, I have a couple of points here. First, when are we going to hear Liz Cheney for president? I'm a big fan.
It's a question asked a lot these days. Will Liz Cheney run for president? But Liz Cheney didn't get that question in September 2022. She was asked 10 years earlier, September 21st, 2012, at a Republican gathering. What happened next? We get back to that event in a moment. First, we go back even earlier, June 24th, 1993, another Republican gathering. Cheney is asked a similar question.
What are the current projects you're working on now, and what future plans for public service might you have?
What's different? In 1993, the question was asked of Liz Cheney's dad, Dick Cheney. And here is Dick Cheney's response.
So I am going to take a look at the 96 race.
Yes, in this episode of C-SPAN's The Weekly, that's where we're headed, the 1996 presidential campaign. Because, like so many others these days, we're talking about a potential Cheney presidential campaign. But in our case, Dick Cheney.
Now the Clinton administration is implementing reductions that threaten to destroy the high-quality forces we will need the next time young Americans are called upon to defend our freedom. We cannot afford to let our capabilities fall and our will be questioned. We have paid dearly in the past for making that same mistake. As we continue to address the pressing issues of Europe's security and prosperity, we must never forget that our vital interests are best served when American leadership stands firm and when American military power remains unquestioned. Thank you for your concern about these very important matters.
And that's how 1994 began, with former Defense Secretary Dick Cheney giving the National Republican radio response to President Bill Clinton, January 15, 1994. Sounds a bit like someone's running for president, eh? Well, let's back up 2 months earlier, November 10th, 1993. Dick Cheney is speaking to Republicans in Laconia, New Hampshire. He is asked about whether he has any interest in running for president in 1996.
The thought has crossed my mind. I haven't made the decision yet. It's a big step to take. I've worked for 3 presidents, watched 2 others up close, and it's a daunting prospect to think about running for president of the United States. For me, it's got to feel right. And when I say feel right, that means I've got to be able to conclude after I've spent a lot of time around the country, here in New Hampshire and back home in Wyoming and elsewhere as I have the last several months, got to be able to see my way clear to run the kind of campaign and then govern in a manner consistent with my basic philosophy and views. I'd like to be able to do at the national level what Governor Merrill's done here in New Hampshire, kept his promises, delivered on basically good, solid conservative principles of how we ought to run the government. If I conclude that there is support for that sort of thing out around the country, then I might make the decision to jump into the contest. But as I say, it's a big step to take. I am working awfully hard at this point, traveling, meeting as many people as possible to lay the groundwork for it, and then make the decision down the road.
And he did spend 1994 deciding whether to run for president. Soon, Dick Cheney is back in New Hampshire, February 25th, 1994, speaking to realtors. Nearly 30 years ago, he discusses a topic that sounds familiar today.
The fact that Russia is the #1 nuclear power in the world and that Ukraine is #3, nation the size of France, 50 million people, but just with what they inherited from the old Soviet Union, they're the world's 3rd-ranking nuclear power, ought to be of concern to everybody, and I think it is. And as we watch these developments unfold, I think we have to remind ourselves that what happens in that part of the world is extremely important, that if conflict does develop between Russia and some of those outlying republics, as is not unreasonable to expect, that the problems that will emerge from that for Europe, the possible refugee flows, the possible involvement of those arsenals is worrisome in the extreme.
We heard Dick Cheney in New Hampshire, the other early voting state, Iowa. On March 11, 1994, he meets with the editorial board of the Des Moines Register. They ask, what factors would he weigh in his decision about whether to run for president?
For me, it would be a sense of whether or not there was support out around the country for the kind of campaign I'd want to run, and for someone with my views and my philosophy about how the government ought to function. whether or not I want to put myself and my family through the meat grinder of a presidential campaign, the loss of privacy, the loss of personal freedom that goes with committing yourself to that kind of effort. So those kinds of considerations.
Who is your family? Would you have kids affected by it?
I have my wife, Lynn, who was the chairman of the National Endowment for the Humanities, and 2 grown daughters.
Another month, another question to Dick Cheney about running for president. April 15th, 1994. This time, the question comes from C-SPAN.
Last year in 1993, you went off on a fly fishing trip, and all the articles at the time, you were telling reporters that you were going to go fly fishing and think about the future, about what your plans were. Well, what came out of that trip last summer?
And a familiar answer.
In terms of what I'm going to do with respect to the future, no, I haven't made any final decisions yet. I did decide that I would not be a candidate for the Senate from Wyoming in 1994, and that I did want to seriously look at running for president in 1996, but I've not yet made that final decision about whether or not I will be a candidate. I won't do that till the end of this year.
On June 4th, 1994, things get a bit more serious for Dick Cheney. He's keynote speaker at the Virginia Republican Party convention in Richmond.
I've been in more than 40 states in the last 16 months. I've seen firsthand the growing disillusion with Bill Clinton. I've talked with thousands of Americans who now believe they made a disastrous mistake in 1992. And I've heard from Republicans from coast to coast about their determination to be part of a nationwide effort to return sanity to the federal government in Washington.
And later that month, even more serious still, Dick Cheney participates in the Iowa Republican Party straw poll of potential presidential candidates. Here are his June 24th, 1994 remarks in Des Moines. They sound a lot like what he said in Richmond. Just want to assure you, we're not replaying the same clip.
I've been in more than 40 states in the last 17 months. I've seen firsthand the growing disillusion with Bill Clinton and the Democrats. I've talked with thousands of Americans who believe we made a disastrous mistake in 1992. I've heard from Republicans from coast to coast who are committed to being part of a nationwide effort to return sanity to the federal government in Washington.
By the way, for you political history sticklers, the results of that June 1994 Iowa Republican straw poll, Bob Dole came in first with 27%, or 356 votes. Dick Cheney came in fifth with 9%, or 130 votes. Okay, let's continue our Dick Cheney for president, potentially for president, journey. Here he is speaking to the Republican National Committee, July 27th, 1994. Listen closely. Do we detect a bit of self-aware, self-deprecating Dick Cheney humor going on?
I have prepared a text this morning, which I do not propose to read. In practice with my old congressional days, I'd like to submit it for the record. And I will summarize. I'd like to leave a little bit of time at the end for some Q&A. So the text is available, though, to the press and to others who might want it. I try hard to be very careful in terms of how I use the English language. I'm often accused by some of being very low-key, of not speaking with enough enthusiasm. I don't tend to pound on the podium and drool when I make speeches. As a matter of fact, the other day, Peggy Noonan was talking about me. She described me as the anti-charisma candidate. She went on to say that Bill Clinton may give charisma such a bad name by 1996. That'll be an asset.
All right, enough teasing around. Let's save everyone a lot of podcast time. Cut to the chase. Did Dick Cheney run for president in 1996? You likely won't be surprised to hear that, no, he did not officially announce a presidential campaign. Why not? Well, here's what he told a caller on C-SPAN's Washington Journal, June 11th, 1995. The caller was from, of all places, Iowa.
Bettendorf, Iowa. Good morning.
Yes, my comment is for Secretary Cheney.
Go ahead.
I'm a great admirer of both you and your wife, Secretary Cheney, and I'm from Iowa. I'd like to ask you to reconsider your decision not to run for president. I think America is crying out for the type of leadership you're capable of.
Well, thank you very much for asking. I did give a serious look at the 96 race. I spent a lot of time on it, did 160 campaigns last year in the lead up to the 94 elections. I concluded in the end that for essentially personal reasons that I would not go after the nomination, that unless you're sufficiently driven to want to pay a very hefty price, that you shouldn't get into the race. And I still value my privacy and my personal freedom, and I was therefore reluctant to embark on that course of action. I haven't retired. I don't expect not to be involved. I think I will be involved in the future, but I don't anticipate running in 96 for president.
Have you endorsed a candidate?
I have not. I've told them all I'm on sabbatical, and I don't want to hear from any of them until next January.
Perhaps appropriately, our next call is from Nashua, New Hampshire. Good morning.
And no, that next caller from New Hampshire didn't get Cheney to reconsider either. But 4 years later, Dick Cheney does run for national office. Republican presidential nominee George W. Bush asked Cheney to head up his vice president search team. And on July 25th, 2000, in Austin, Texas, Governor Bush reveals his pick.
Early this morning, I called and asked him to join me in renewing America's purpose together. So I'm proud to announce that Dick Cheney, a man of great integrity, sound judgment, and experience, is my choice to be the next Vice President of the United States.
And here's what it sounds like when a Cheney gets on a national ticket.
I look forward to working with you, Governor, to change the tone in Washington, to restore a spirit of civility and respect and cooperation. It's time for America's leaders to stop pointing the finger of blame and to begin sharing the credit for success. Big changes are coming to Washington, and I want to be a part of them. And I want to thank my family for their love and their support and their willingness to join me in this campaign. It means more than they will ever know. We have a tough race ahead of us, but I look forward to this campaign, and I am absolutely confident we will prevail.
Dick Cheney was right. The Bush-Cheney ticket did prevail twice. Now let's circle back to Liz Cheney and 2024. If Liz Cheney runs for president, she'll likely be talking about Donald Trump. On July 11th, 2019, at an event at the White House, President Trump talked about Liz Cheney.
A friend of mine and a wonderful person and somebody that has, pretty unlimited future, I'd say. I hear a lot of very positive things. Liz Cheney. Liz, thank you. Thank you.
We'll see if Donald Trump's prediction is right, that Liz Cheney has an unlimited future. And what about Donald Trump and Dad Dick Cheney? Liz Cheney also was with President Trump at the White House on June 20th, 2018. They discussed funding for the military. After Liz Cheney spoke, President Trump responded.
Thank you, Liz. And say hello to your father, please. Wake up.
Oh, one last bit of business. Our bonus clip. We promised at the outset to play more from that Republican event in 2012, where Liz Cheney was urged to run for president. She didn't answer the question, but she did tell the crowd something else: how to get news and information.
I'm not saying this just because I work for Fox. I do work for Fox, but, watch Fox. And I think the internet is a hugely important tool, and the mainstream media, they are absolutely desperate to try to make sure Barack Obama is reelected. I mean, you can't even make this stuff up. Because they're ignorant. I mean, Chris Matthews saying the president gives him a tingle up his leg. I mean, I mean, look, I think that it is incumbent on all of us to be a really well-informed electorate. And because of social media, because of conservative talk radio, because of Fox, because of the internet, there are tremendous outlets for information.
Now, 10 years later, we hope all sides consider C-SPAN radio podcasts to be a tremendous outlet for information. That's it for this episode of C-SPAN's The Weekly, A reminder, you could do your own searches in the C-SPAN video library. Just go to cspan.org and use the search bar on top. There's lots more Cheney in there, both of them. Thanks for listening, and happy searching.